Hello, welcome to Matters of DeCorum. I'm Scott Corum. This is what matters to me. Dungeon Ecology is a concept that first occurred to me when I read a sidebar in it in GURPS Fantasy 3rd Edition, I think. Up until that point in time, dungeons, whatever they actually were, they're kind of a generic term for a subterranean structure or eventually just some structure that adventurers would go through that had some maze-like structures within them where you would have fights and encounter traps and have to deal with challenges. Often story-driven, you'd start at one end and get to the other, and they have a legend and a lore, and people design them badly all the time. I didn't realize they were bad designs until I read this sidebar and got a little insight. In short, you walk into a 10-foot by 10-foot room. In the center is a chest being guarded by an orc. Often that was an isolated location in a dungeon, unrelated from many other things. It is an unusual place to keep a chest, if it is in fact a chest and the orc hasn't been tricked into guarding a mimic. It is usually described as having only those two items in it. There is a chest, there is an orc. The orc is guarding the chest. Ideally, someone in that dungeon was there to tell that orc to guard that chest. There's a reason that orc is not just rifling the chest himself and leaving. That orc should have some source of food. That orc should have, be one of 3 orcs who have a shift to do this. There should be a room somewhere else in that dungeon where that orc goes in, trades out with another orc, sits down, has a meal, goes, sleeps, lather, rinse, repeats, comes back and does his job. Is this the orc's only opportunity in this dungeon? Is there any hope for advancement for this orc or those orcs working with him? Or is this going to be a chest garden orc for the rest of his life? That is until a dungeon team, a group of adventurers comes in to kill the orc and take what is in the chest. And then what kind of insurance is paid out to that orc's survivors, whether it is the orc's failing parents someplace on the surface, or if the orc had some opportunity for dating while they were down in the dungeon. The amount of stuff that needs to exist to support an orc guarding a chest in a dungeon is actually kind of prodigious. You walk into a 10-foot by 10-foot room. In the center is a chest. Draped over the chest is the skeleton of an orc. It looks like he died of starvation. Dungeon ecology is the concept that things in dungeons, should have some interrelationship. Early dungeons often had these wildly varied encounters in them that had no rhyme or reason to why they were all in the same structure to begin with. And there needs to be something in there to explain and support why those particular creatures are able to survive in this place. This dungeon has sat for over 100,000 years. Well, okay, that's great, but unless everything in there is a construct or undead, and a construct is kind of pushing it unless there's also magic involved, keeping the constructs maintained. Dungeon ecology makes dungeons a more rich and complex thing, and not just this hand-wavy fantasy element of your role-playing game, because it couldn't possibly actually work. It doesn't make any sense. You want it to make some sense. Early computer games, and still some computer games to this day, had a very similar problem. In that there were maps designed for you to go through, first-person shooters. Dark Forces 2. I love those games. I love those games a lot. But Those I like me a first person shooter running through a high tech environment, picking up weapons and getting upgrades, and but you'd climb up a ladder and you'd go across catwalks and you'd go through the ventilation system and avoid a laser grid and go over these gnashing metal teeth, and you get to this room and there'd be a guy in there with armor and a gun, and he'd be shooting at you. You take him out and you go and scout the room. You look at the computer console in that room for any lore, and then you go through back into the ventilation system and start crawling around trying to find where the next room is. And that's where that guy worked. That was that guy's job. Is that how he got to work every day? Is that computer console, you can picture this guy sitting down, helmet off, cup of coffee from someplace, because, well, there has to be a coffee dispenser someplace. It's a workplace, for goodness sake. Sitting down and pulling up his reports and filling out his, well, nothing happened in my closet today. Having to climb through laser grids and jump over chasms to take his lunch break. I usually couldn't find a bathroom for them. And uh, in time, as the genre and the medium evolved, you started to see complexes that were more like office buildings, if they weren't just office buildings, where there were actual break rooms, and there's the coffee dispenser. This is the bathroom that they used. And there isn't just the one super dangerous laser gritty way to get to the office. You can get to the office like 5 or 6 different ways. Some of them are super stealthy, and you do have to crawl through vents, but there's also just a hallway that moves out in front, or a maintenance hallway that goes behind where folks move around to do work in the background, maintain the computer systems, whatnot. Deus Ex, very good at that. Particular Mankind Divided and Human Revolution had very good level design when it comes to that. Your level design in a first-person shooter, your dungeon design in a fantasy role-playing game, there is a common element to their evolution and a common element to how it is often good to look at them today. And that is, even if it is a super high tech, or if it is a low tech, high magic fantasy setting, and if you're emulating the year 2045, or if you're emulating the year 492, it has to make a certain amount of sense. You can add elements to the story to make a less sensical structure make more sense. Well, this castle was only ever meant to be occupied by the undead, the vampire lord who rules here, and the necromancer who has been supporting him for so long, much longer than a natural lifetime. Had the castle constructed by the animated dead of a dwarven clan who were never meant to make it so that the living could successfully occupy it. No living creature could survive in a place so bereft of the structures necessary to maintain life. No, this is a place just for the dead. Less a castle, more a catacomb. That works if that is what you're looking for. If you want something that is so cold or so alien that you can walk away from the things that make a structure make a certain amount of sense to the modern mind or the modern thinking of what you need to have a place that works. All of which is to say that for the majority of your stories, for stories that you want to be relatable, no matter how you're telling it through the game or the medium of the game, that to have that element of verisimilitude. Does this appear to be a true thing? Does this make sense? Every so often, you've got to devote some space in that design to things that make life possible. And sometimes more than possible. Why would someone work in this building? Why would you apply for this place? Well, there is a bathroom on every floor for every 200 or 300 employees. And there's a shooting range in the basement where you can learn to operate any of the 1,000 deadly items. And then there's just a whole bunch of 4 foot by 4 foot cubicles people go into and work on their computers in. Where's the break room? Where's where's the gym and the cafeteria that actually keeps everyone happy in your despotic regime? Where's your training room, your dojo, where they learn their hand to hand? Your offices for the higher ups that have more amenities. Are you going to have people here so much that you need to have living quarters for them? And what kind of shape are those in? Can you actually live out of one? How do they get their groceries? You get further along in technology or further back in magic, and high tech and magic's all the same. Oh, I push a button and I've got a can of coffee. Or if you go to this magical chest and open it up, it has whatever food you would like to eat in it right just that moment. All that's great, but oh my lord, that's expensive. If you've got a patron building this structure who has no problem spending all the extra cash on the enchantments that make the food happen or the replication network that brings you whatever food is stored in the system, okay, that's fine. And that's a great story element. Your structure needs to tell a story. You can tell so much about the people that you are fighting and your ultimate goals as you're the protagonist in one of these stories from what you are going through, how the structure is built, what it provides for, how it provides for it. Dungeon ecology and video game logic don't just give you a sense of verisimilitude. That is the ground level requirement for these things, that they give you some kind of basis to work from. Okay, at the most base level, I walk into this place and I can believe I'm in some kind of structure that people would actually have built for the purpose I'm in. Now, tell me a story with it. How is the architecture? Is it easy to get around? Is it kind of hard to get around? Are there places it's hard to get to deliberately? Not impossible. People got to work there. But as your security measures increase, is it more difficult for me to pass through just because of how it's built and not just because of the giant death robot on the other side of that door? That door. Let's talk about that door for a moment. I've got to get through that door. My waypoint is on the other side of that door. My mission says I got to get to the other side of that door. My informant said that door. I got to get to the other side of that door. And on the other side of that door is some major plot element. Maybe it's a fight. Maybe it is something you need to steal. Maybe it's some information you need to learn. I got to get through that door. That door tells a story all on its own. And the choices you make in designing that door and the approach to that door before you ever get through informs me as a player of story elements. You don't have to give me 1,000 computer terminals or a bunch of scrolls that I need to read before I get there to tell me these things. Is the door big and imposing? Was it built to look like something I shouldn't go through? Are there symbols on the door telling me I shouldn't go through this door? Or is it small, unimposing? Does it look like every other door I've been to? Does it not stand out from the door to the closet or the office down the hall? Is it just another door? Did they put so much effort into making this door that they made the door announce itself as a place I shouldn't go through? Or did they calmly and intelligently hide that door from in the middle of a sea of other doors, no better, no different to the eye or regular senses? Did I have to fight 1,000 guys to get to this door? Every other door I had a little bit of a shootout to go through. I had to sneak my way around a couple guys, but you get to this door and oh gosh, there's a boss battle to get to the door, much less whatever happens when I get through it. There's 5 security drones that drop down and start taking fire on me, and I gotta work out the fields of fire and get out of the way of that. There's a giant enchantment in front of the door that evaporates anyone who hasn't solved this particular puzzle that I've got to get from the answers to from 5 different places. Is that the kind of door this is? Or did I need to find the right key or key card? Was there a code scrawled on a matchbook on the first level? Do I have a skill for letting me pick this lock? And is this a harder lock to pick than the average? Next to impossible, but not completely. I have to hack a security system to get through this door. And this is a more complex security system than doors I've come across. Is it no different in as far as security or difficulty of achieving or passing through than any other door? And what does each of those approaches tell me as a player? Not every player plays the way I do. Not every player is plumbing the environment for all the clues and all the information they can get about who I'm dealing with and what their methods are. I like learning a bad guy. I like learning a villain's mind by how they have set things up. I get a good idea of their attitude by how things are built around them. And this is where that rubber meets the road. When you write this villain's, whether it's an organization or an individual, where how you write their buildings, their structures, their architecture, and their ideology for utilizing it. That is some amazing storytelling. Tomb of Horrors. Tomb of Horrors tells you a lot about the being responsible for it. It's not my favorite dungeon. Tomb of Horrors is still my D&D Vietnam, but it's super informative. Deus Ex Human Revolution, you go to different structures owned by different groups, and you learn about those groups and their ideologies, partially from how they have set up the structures they are responsible for. System Shock, particularly System Shock 2, Half-Life. You go to some of the classics, some of the very well-remembered games, and this is one of the elements that the level design, the structure design, the architecture, is a factor in the storytelling. It tells a story all of its own. When you are crafting a game, video game, role-playing game, what have you, when you are crafting a game that has these stories in them, a game comprised of storytelling, you have a lot of different avenues for getting that information across. And you can do it as openly or as ham-handedly as you like. And there's room for all of that. There's room for just blank gray walls as far as the eye can see, where you pick up a note every so often and learn a little bit of lore. That's fine. That's one way to do it. But you can also immerse someone in a world and let how that world is built and how they've chosen to structure everything. The gameplay trailer for Cyberpunk 2077. Oh, I that was pre-ordered last year for me. That was a Father's Day gift to me to have that pre-ordered so far in advance. But that is a very rich world. I've been a player of the role-playing game forever, since the 80s and 90s, officially the 90s. Um, but the richness and the detail they put into that world um, tells me a story every 10 feet that I walk, gives me information, fills me in, puts me there. And the more you craft that immersive experience, the better an experience your gamers will have sitting down and being taken through it. I'm running a campaign for my group in Lamita based on the campaign world Salt in the Wound, a city that is basically built around an imprisoned Tarask that survives by constantly butchering the creature, which can't die and constantly regenerates. And bringing people through that world is an exercise in visceral storytelling and filling in details constantly that talk about the mood and the realities of a life based on butchering a monster. And the folks who wrote that, um, I think I kickstarted it. I think you can still find the materials. Just search "Salt in the Wound" or Tarask, and you'll probably find that. Did an amazing job of giving us an immersive and incredible environment to deal with. When you have a situation like that where you've got so much lavish and lush detail, you might have to pick and choose a little bit. I tended to over narrate scenes because there was so much there that I felt I had to get out. But that's on the dungeon master side, not the designer side. And what's more, they put the time and effort into making everything work. It functions together. It's not pretty, but it was never going to be, and it wasn't meant to be. In the end, it's all storytelling. In the end, it is another avenue of storytelling that has had an incredible path of evolution in my lifetime. I've seen this go from its very basic 6 polygons to a screen, trying to be a dungeon, to what we have today. And it's important to realize how much of that storytelling effort is just in the building you find yourself standing in. Walking up to it, going into it, what lore has reached your ears about it before you get inside. And once you're inside, how it's built, what it's telling you with its brick and its mortar or its gleaming steel walls or the tubing and pipes exposed in certain places, but glass and steel in others. Because I do love me a good story in all of its aspects, and that bears thinking about. Thank you for following me along in this particular ramble. Storytelling is one of my favorite subjects, so I'll probably talk a lot more about it in the future. If you liked the video, give me a thumbs up. If you didn't like the video, give me a thumbs down. Feedback is feedback. If there's anything else you'd like to hear me talk about, subjects you'd like to hear me cover, I got a very good comment last week requesting I talk about the subject of bullying in and out of game, and I thought I would cover that in a future week because I didn't want to do 2 heavy weeks in a row. But stuff you'd like to hear me talk about, go ahead and leave me a comment. I will love getting your comment. You will love leaving me one. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, why not? My channel is awesome. Go ahead and hit the subscribe button. If you do, hit the little notification bell next to it so you're alerted when my videos become available. If you'd like to support the channel in a more substantial manner, I invite you to hit me up at my Patreon page, www.patreon.com/ScottCorum, and consider donating. Absolutely anything helps. Allows me to make better videos more often. In the meantime, thank you very much for watching. I'm Scott Corum. This is what has mattered to me, and I'll see you next time on the next Matters of DeCorum.